Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome back to the second series of the ScotsCare podcast. ScotsCare is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots in London through a range of support, including financial grants, advocacy, counselling and sheltered housing for older Scots, job coaching, social events, befriending, and support for children and families. The charity's been running for 400 years to help break the cycle of poverty experienced by some Scots. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all walks of life, from celebrities and authors, athletes and actors, business entrepreneurs to academics, all with one thing in common: Scots heritage, and they enjoy a good blether. Joining me this week is comedian, writer and actor Sanjeev Kohli. He's a bit of a man for all seasons, really. I caught up with Sanjeev a wee while back over Zoom. I was in London and he was at home in Glasgow, and I actually logged on to the Zoom early just to check everything was okay, and he was already there waiting. Great punctuality. I think it's fair to say that most people know Sanjeev from playing the character Navid the shopkeeper in the sitcom Still Game. Still Game is the most popular and most successful Scottish sitcom of all time. We spoke about that, of course, his role in it, and how it came about, and how it nearly never came about, which is almost a common theme in this podcast amongst the writers and the actors that I've spoken to in the past. We chatted about his upbringing, moving from London to Scotland at a young age, and his school years, and growing up in Glasgow as an Asian person with an English accent. Sanjeev was very open about his dad's Alzheimer's. And since we recorded this interview, his dad has sadly passed away. And I considered taking that part of the interview out, editing it out. But Sanjeev talks about his father with such love and admiration and laughter that I thought it was fitting to leave it. He also talked about how an Alzheimer's diagnosis not only affects the patient, but the family around them too. If you have Amazon Prime, you can see Sanjeev right now in Series 2, Season 2, if you're American or under 30, Series 2 of The Rig, alongside Ian Glenn and Martin Compston. He plays a doctor in that. Oh, and just to say, there's a couple of incidences of ever so slightly fruity language. Nothing to worry about, just a couple of tiny things. A couple of fruity little words, just to let you know before you listen. Anywho, enough waffle from me. Here we go with Sanjeev Kohli on the ScotsCare podcast.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. You're very prompt.
I know. I've had problems. I've got a new laptop, and it was there's a bit of panic stations the last couple of times I did Zooms. I thought I'd better just check everything was working fine, and it is. Oh,
no, it's the same as me. I'm one of these people, I think, Sanjeev, I'd rather be half an hour early than 1 minute late because I'm a panicker. I tend to worry that things are going to go wrong or the Zoom is going to say, we need to update right now.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm a panicker, but I'm also very lazy. So it's a couple of antagonistic dynamics going on there. But I'm here now, so.
I like how they sit next to each other. I'm kind of like that myself. I kind of wanted to go right back and talk about the beginning because, you know, ScotsCare is a charity. We're based in London. You know, you were born in London. Am I right in thinking that?
That's right. Yeah, 1970. So my mum and dad. So my dad's from India. My mum is from Nairobi in Kenya, where there's a massive Indian community, and so they had an arranged marriage, and they got married in I think 65, and then came over to the UK in 66. I only found out recently that my dad had actually hadn't intended to stay in London. He was only going to stay there for a couple of weeks and then go to America, but he just liked it. So he stayed in London. And then my two brothers and myself were all born there. I was born in 70. And then, so that's actually why I've got a slightly Anglified accent, which is why, yeah.
When did you move to Glasgow then?
Well, my dad retrained as a teacher, and he went to Dundee teacher training college, and he used to actually commute. He used to go down on the bus on a Sunday from London to Dundee, and then come back on the Friday night. And I've got vague memories of this strange man coming to our house on a Saturday. It was my dad. um, and uh, and then he got his first job in Glasgow. So that's he moved us up in 73. Yeah, so that was it. So it was. You hear a lot of stories about like Asian families moving from London to England, England to Scotland, but it's usually to do with a restaurant or a shop. But this was actually my dad retraining as a teacher. That's what brought us up to Scotland. So yeah.
I wonder whether it's also a generational thing, like our generation, where you said you would see your dad at the weekend when he came back. And I kind of remember my dad was a driving instructor for a lot of years, and he worked till 8 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. And I never saw my dad for years and years. And I used to see him when we were cutting about the West End of Glasgow. I would see my dad in his car teaching people, and he would beep at me and would kind of wave.
That's mental. So Gregory's girl is quite triggering for you then?
Yeah, it is, because he does that, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not seen. You know what? I never ever thought of that. Yeah.
Because at one point, is Dave Anderson is playing his dad, and he says, "Perhaps you could make an appointment to meet sometime. Maybe at the dinner table in the kitchen." And that must be the same for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very similar. Yeah, I have these kind of memories. My dad passed away during COVID, but I have these memories now of him coming in at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and half the time my brother and I would already be in bed, and he'd have gone via the University Cafe on Byers Road and bring us like double nuggets or single nugget ice creams.
Oh my God, do you know what? If you're talking, my wife used to work in the University Cafe when she was 14. So if you ever went in there in around about 83, 84, you might have been served by my wife. There you go.
Strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was talking to Michelle Gomez last week from Doctor Who, the flight attendant, and she was saying how she spent years not being able to find full-time work as an actress, and she used to work in Babbity Bousters.
Yes.
And I said, I remember that. I remember it was always packed, and we used to drink in there. And she said she kind of said the times that she was there. And I was thinking, it would have been kind of strange if we were in drinking in Babbity's and she was the barmaid.
Yeah, I think Charlene Spiteri cut my hair in Rusk's once as well. I can't prove that for sure, but I'm pretty sure that she did. Well, I can't prove it.
Things that might or might not have happened to us.
I know.
Yeah. So when you moved to Glasgow, there's always been, when I was growing up, there was always a good Asian community in Glasgow. Did you have family around you when you moved up?
No, in a lot of ways, my dad was a sort of a bit of a pioneer. So we were certainly the first or second Asian family in our street, in our neighbourhood. So we, well, first of all, we actually stayed in flats just in Hillhead, and then we moved to Bishopbriggs, which was very vanilla at that time. In Spam Valley, Wimpy Estate, and we were the only family, certainly for a bit of a radius, and then there was another family kind of further up the street. And then a couple of years later, another family, the Panesas, moved in right next door to us. We almost had this kind of small Asian ghetto at the corner of Meadowburn and Bishopbriggs. But no, it wasn't like Woodlands or the Shields, which was like big Asian communities. Not at all. We were. It's probably informed. It's probably why I got into comedy, actually, because I think a lot of time as a comedian, you're offering an outsider's perspective or just a slightly different perspective. And I always had a slightly different perspective. So because we were, like I say, one of a handful of brown people in our area, and then already I'm on the back foot because I'm specky and I've got an English accent. And then my mum and dad sent me to fee-paying Catholic school, and I'm one of 3 brown people there. So it always gives you that. Like Billy Connolly talks about it. He says, as a comedian, you're just maybe 2 degrees to the left, but you're seeing stuff that people aren't seeing. Like, so for example, if I see an orange walk, I'm like, well, this is new to me. This is bizarre. Whereas if you've grown up with it, you just don't see the bizarre stuff because it's compounded into you. Whereas when you've had that fresh, when you have fresh eyes on something, like, why is no one else seeing how bizarre this is? So I think
I read that you said once, I think it was in an interview, you said that you tend to overthink things and maybe that you fear change, you tend to overthink things, and this sometimes stops you doing things. And I wonder though, the overthinking things is where a lot of comedy brilliance comes from, because a lot of the comedians that I've met in my time over the years, they have overthought things, or they've been quite morose people, because they're generally the people that can read between the lines of life. Yeah,
that's true. I think it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, if you have that overthinking gene or whatever, if it is a genetic thing, I don't know, because not everyone's like that. And you don't find a way of monetizing it or channeling it into something artistic, then you're in trouble, because it's not great. It makes you morose. When you overthink things, there's very few positive outcomes, unless, as I say, you can channel it into being Radiohead or being, Jack D or whatever. So yeah, I'm sure it's part of the package, and it is. People are surprised at how morose stand-ups can be. It's
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. But
I remember
yeah,
years ago meeting, what's the Irish guy called? I'm going to say he was in Black Books.
oh God, yeah, Dylan Moran, yeah, brilliant stand-up.
Brilliant stand up, but phenomenally morose man. And
Yeah,
he
yeah.
just looks really depressed a lot of the time, but absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, I grew up in Clydebank for many years, and there was no Asian families in Clydebank. And I still remember in my primary school where one Asian family moved into the area, and there was a kid called Masood, and he ended up being my brother's best friend. But it was really chalk and cheese. They were completely stand out as a family, and I'm thinking that must have been late. No, that must have been late 70s, early 80s. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking how much these areas, Clydebank, and especially Glasgow and the West End, have changed over the last of our
yeah,
generation. Far more multicultural now.
definitely. And yeah, I guess we're just a generation that also because I wasn't born in Scotland, but I was born in the UK, and I always talk about the suitcase on top of the wardrobe mentality. So with my parents' generation, they didn't. A lot of them, I think, maybe thought that they were going to go back to India or Pakistan at some point or Bangladesh at some point, and they always had the suitcase on top of the wardrobe, be it real or metaphorical. Whereas our generation that were born here, we feel, well, no, we're as Scottish as you are, even though I felt like I was on the back foot for maybe 10 or 15 years of my life and felt like an outsider. Not always made to feel like an outsider, probably felt that way myself. But as I kind of, that whole generation grew in confidence and we said, well, no, we belong here now and we've got numbers now. And
Mm.
having a plural identity is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I can pull focus when I need to. I can be a Ouija or I can be Asian, just depending on my circumstance. And diversity is a good thing. And it took a while to come to that conclusion because you were never made to feel particularly. No, I've always said Glasgow's a very welcoming place. I mean, I said this during a documentary that um, my dad. That's what I was making a documentary about Glasgow because it was 2014 and it was the year that Glasgow had the Commonwealth Games. So they commissioned this series of documentaries called "I Belong to Glasgow," and there was four of us. There was myself, Cam Dunbar, Elaine C. Smith, and Alex Norton were kind of the subjects. I mean, they were like light-hearted documentaries. It was really just four people's different perspectives on growing up in Glasgow. And obviously, my story is very interesting, having not been born here, and also my parents being of a very different culture, and then being sent to a Catholic school. So all those things were explored. And I interviewed my mum and my dad, and I asked my dad a question that I'd never asked him before. I said, "When did you feel welcome in Glasgow?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How long did that take?" He said, "About 20 minutes." He said, "I didn't fully understand what they were saying to me, but it felt warm and it felt positive." So, Glasgow is a welcoming place. Having said that, it's when you are the only brown kid in your street or in your school, you're sort of on the back foot. And it probably wasn't until the 90s. So I was born in 1970. It probably wasn't. And this is another thing that I noticed as well is if I went into Glasgow city centre in the late 70s, early 80s when I was old enough to go, it'd be a surprise if someone didn't say something to me, something negative.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And you don't think about it. It just became part of your reality. I'm not moaning about it. I had a very privileged upbringing, but people would definitely say stuff. And then as time progressed, you got to the mid '80s, late '80s. It would be a surprise if someone did say something. So we witnessed that change. We witnessed being made to feel a bit more part of the furniture, and obviously as businesses and stuff uh, uh, establish themselves in communities. And it's also just fear of the unknown. I mean, my mum ran a shop in Battlefield in the south side of Glasgow, and she was a wee Punjabi woman in a shalwar kameez, and people would come in. And you could tell they were slightly wary that I don't know what not in a bad way. It's just like this is the unknown. And then my mum would speak better English than they did because she'd been a social worker, and things like that can make a difference. It's why I'm slightly obsessed with shops because they are kind of I watched my mum being part of a community and actually interacting with people. Because you can go your whole day, you can see people of different ethnicity and not engage with them or not interact with them.
Yeah.
But if you go into a shop and you speak to someone, then you have that interaction and you realize, well, do you know what? 90% we have 90% in common. There might be 10% that's slightly different, but there's 90% that we have in common, and sometimes it takes that physical interaction to come to that conclusion. And that's not a racism thing. That's just anyone's fear of what they don't know. Do you know what I mean? I mean, yeah, there are people who are racist, but also people who just, until they have the interaction, they don't know.
Children and families are ScotsCare's top priorities. They're where most of our help goes. ScotsCare offers financial grants, counselling, respite holidays, and days out to the likes of London Zoo and Winter Wonderland. We see helping families with tailored support as key to improving the lives of Scots in London.
And so you ended up at St Aloysius, this fee-paying private Catholic school, like you said, and you did very well. You know, were your parents, especially maybe your dad, did he push you in a positive way into education? Did he see that as a route to success for you at that point?
Oh, no question. I mean, they were very keen to get us. They always said that we had to try twice as hard, just because, you know, we were different. And education, it's certainly within sort of the middle class Indian community, is a massive thing. You're more or less expected to get a degree in something or other. But I was always very self-driven. I didn't really, from the age of, I was always very academic. That's just the way I was, and I was very good at book learning. Not the most practical person in the world, but very good at the book learning. So I always knew that. I sort of convinced myself that I wanted to be a doctor, because I knew it'd please my mum and dad. They never actually pushed me into it. It's almost like I preempted it, but I knew it'd make them happy. But also, I've got glaucoma, so I've always had problems with my eyes. So from the age of 8 or 9, I was in and out of the ophthalmologist, and I think I just convinced myself that it might be nice to be on the other side of the machines, and also with the education system in Scotland being what it is, you know, having, you know, I'm of the O grade generation, and you had to choose your O grades when you were 12, 13 years old. So you're having to project forward to what your career might be at a stupidly young age. So I'd see people around me sort of floundering and panicking, and I thought, well, I've made my decision, so I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm going to be a doctor, and that's it. I can park that now and just do the subjects I need to do. And that's what happened. And
so you ended up doing maths at university.
Yeah.
And can you talk me through about, it seems a kind of cultural handbrake turn in my head for somebody who you kind of seem set up for a successful career in a kind of normal, safe, stable way at that point, doing maths, and then to go from there to writing and performing comedy. How did that come about, and what was your father's reaction to that? Was he saying, Sanjeev, get back in your lane at that point?
No, so I had originally, I started a medical degree, and after 2 days I knew I'd made a mistake, and I switched lanes then to maths after 4 months. And my mum was definitely the more disappointed of the two, but my dad could see how unhappy I was, and he was much more laid back about it. And all that, he was just happy that I was doing something. He was doing a degree that was, you know, usable, as it were. So I got my maths degree, and then I started a postgrad down in London, and again hated it. And I came back to Glasgow, and I was sort of directionless and rudderless for a while. But my dad, bless him, in fact, both my parents, they obviously worried, because I'm at that stage now, because my kids are that age now, and I worry. But they more or less just left me to it. But I never pursued a career in what I'm doing now. I sort of fell into my lap in a weird way, because it was someone approached me to audition to present a radio show. It was a friend from university who thought I'd be a good radio presenter, and it approached me and said, look, it's a bit left field, but I'm producing a radio show and I'm trying to unearth new talent. And it was a multicultural radio show, so the idea was to unearth new talent that wasn't necessarily white Scottish talent. And so I auditioned to present this radio show, and I got the job, and suddenly I'm presenting a radio show, and I'm finding that I'm really good at it, and it seemed to come naturally to me. And then, because I had watched a lot of comedy as a kid, I was an incredibly shy child, very, very diffident, and didn't really speak to people, but watched lots of comedy and music on telly, and became slightly obsessed with the young ones. And so I had, through university was where I sort of found my voice a bit, and I became known as someone that was quite funny, but not in a formal way, just had just through comedy, I'd watched and learned stuff. So when it came to radio presenting, I could be a presenter whose default setting was comedy. So I'd start writing little lines, in my links that were funny, and then that got noticed, and that's what led to sketch writing. And then everything it was all very organic though. There was no game plan. It's certainly, if you'd have told anyone that I knew that knew me at the age of 13 that I would be a performer of any description, they would have laughed you out, because I was so incredibly shy and non-performative. So all very, you say handbrake turn is probably the correct response. I also did a maths degree, which is the one degree that involves absolutely no creativity whatsoever. There's no dissertation. It is that there's no essay.
It's very black and white, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. There's So it's very, very different. But there is a lot of maths and comedy. If you watch an episode of Seinfeld, it's actually quite mathematical when you properly analyze it. So maths and music and comedy are actually all interlinked in ways that you maybe don't appreciate. Well, music and maths is more obvious, but maths and comedy, there's a few people that are mathematical that are comedians as well, for good reason.
I wonder if your kind of fearlessness of going and saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to follow my heart, does come from the fact that you're very supported and loved by your parents. And I think something you wrote once, it kind of resonated with me a bit. You said you're talking about your parents. You said our parents had no fear. If they decided to do something, they just did it. And I like this because, again, I think maybe that's a generational thing. And it made me think of my mum and dad once, where they wanted to go to Italy, and they wanted to take us to Italy. And this is, we didn't have sat nav or anything. And my dad had a Talbot Horizon car. And I still remember I must have been 10, and he went and bought a map out of the AA shop on the corner of just the road that goes under Central Station Bridge.
Yes.
And then, he put us in the back of the car with a couple of Beano summer specials, and we drove to Italy. And it took 3 days.
Yeah.
And now, I've got 3 kids the same as you, and thinking back in that now, that seems nuts to me. I can't imagine ever, no sat nav, just the big AA map, and off they went. I wonder whether I certainly have lost a bit of that kind of fearlessness just to get up and do it. And I think you've obviously got it because your parents have given you that support to say, I will follow my heart.
I mean, I look, don't get me wrong. I am, to use the Glasgow vernacular, still a shite bag. I've fallen into what I do. I'm not fearless in the slightest, but I was definitely supported. I mean, if I didn't have that support, if I had said to my mum and dad, "Oh, look, someone's phoned up and said, do you want to present a radio program?" and they'd not been supportive, or they'd given me any kind of negative feedback, and then who knows what would have happened. But I think they just wanted to. They could see I was unhappy. They could see I was directionless. But you talk about our parents' fearlessness. My God, I mean, when I think of what my mum and dad did, they came to the UK with very little, to a culture that was probably quite hostile, and that whole generation, I can't believe the absolute fearlessness that they had to do what they did. I couldn't go halfway across the world to start a new life. I've not left Glasgow. I've only been out of Glasgow from the age of 3, I should say. I went down south for 4 months for an aborted PhD, and I've not really left, so I couldn't really call myself fearless, but I'm absolutely supported and have been, and there's no way I could have done that without the support. And when I look at my mum and dad's story and what they did, they're absolute heroes for what they did, for having flourished so well in a different culture. I don't think I could do anything close to that.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Can I ask you, Sanjeev, you were very open recently when you spoke about your dad's Alzheimer's. Has this been particularly hard on you and the family?
Yeah, we're in the middle of it just now. So my dad turns 90 in a few weeks, and I think he'll see it. I think he'll, but he's, we're talking end of life now, and there are advantages to it, when you lose someone in a slow way. There are advantages because you can sort of say different versions of goodbye. The dad that I'm seeing just now, he's still there. He's still recognized to be my dad. He can be sarcastic, but he is not the dad that I knew from 2 years ago. But it means you can sort of say your goodbye in installments and sort of almost grieve versions of your dad, if you know what I mean. So when the time comes, obviously I want my dad to live forever, but no one's dad lives forever. but I'll be probably more mentally prepared for it. I mean, it's not nice seeing my dad, a very proud, independent man who traveled the world. He can't leave his bed just now, and that's painful. Um, Thankfully, he because he's got Alzheimer's, he's not angry about it. I think that would hurt more if I felt that he was frustrated by it. But just the way he is just now, he doesn't seem to be. I've got a friend whose dad has Alzheimer's, and he's really angry that he can't remember things. My dad's not. He's quite resigned to it, and that's, from a selfish point of view, it means that I can cope with it better, knowing that he isn't frustrated by it. Because like, to be caged by your own body must be the worst feeling in the world. But I don't think he feels that way. But equally, it does hurt that he can't leave his bed anymore. But I'm quite stoical about it. And he's had a great life. My dad was always a great traveler, and he saw most of the things he wanted to see. He's been to Machu Picchu, he's been to Kashmir, he's been, on several cruises, and so he's had a great life, and yeah, you just find ways of coping, don't you? And I've just been quite stoical about it.
I think I say this more as an observation rather than a question. I think what I found quite difficult, my mum passed away in 2012, and then my dad died during COVID. And I think what I found difficult in a strange way is that it was the conversations we never had. And I don't mean the big conversations, just there was a lot of questions that my kids now ask me. They'll say, well, how did Papa do this? Or how did Granddad do that? And I kind of think, I come to the realization that I didn't have the answers because I didn't know what the answers were. And I now had no way of finding out. And it's kind of one of life's cruelties that I don't mean that to be overly dramatic. The answers weren't coming. And now the information I have is the information I have.
Yeah. But also as well, I don't know whether, because obviously the generation gap went like that, didn't it? It's like when I think, you were talking about the Beano earlier. It's like everyone's dad was like Roger the Dodger's dad. You just felt like they were dad, and you couldn't have a conversation with them. They were just there to slipper you when you strayed out of line. When you think of the relationship we have with our kids, they're so much more open, and you're much more a friend than.
Yeah,
and
that generation of men.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm a man child. I'm a complete man child. You've got a generation. I mean, I'm not a gamer myself, but my son is, and I know that there are dads that will play Grand Theft Auto with their kids. I mean, my dad was not interested in football in the slightest, and we were all into football. But my dad was this tall, turbaned Sikh, and I never expected to have anything in common with my dad. He was just my dad. He was just the provider. So I never. It's a strange one. I never really felt that, like, even with the work that I do, I don't expect him to like it because, like, he's not my audience. Whereas, so I never sought my dad's approval in that way because it was just, I guess we had the added layer of not only is it a generational difference, it's also a cultural difference. So I never, because I know what you're saying about we never had those conversations with my dad, but I never expected to have those conversations with my dad. But what's been also really sweet is that his relationship with his grandkids is much more. He was just a big teddy bear when it came to my children. Like, because he was working really, really hard to put us through private school, and my dad could be quite grumpy. And again, I just accepted that. But when he was he just completely softened when it came to the grandkids, and that was lovely to see that relationship. So yeah, I know what you mean, but it's I guess my I didn't really have. My dad's dad passed away when I was tiny, and my mum's dad passed away when I was 10. So I'm just like, my kids had a granddad, and that's what I take from that. They had a granddad who was lovely to them. So that was nice.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my dad was very similar in that he was hard with us, and I didn't see him much, but he did see. I got two older boys and a daughter of 5, and six. And he saw Indy. He saw Indy be born, and he held him, and that was nice. And he was very soft at that point, even though he had Parkinson's. So he wasn't great at holding her. So it's kind of, you had to make sure you were near him. But but it was interesting. You said, like, we have to talk about still game, because you've said a couple of times that Navid was never based on your dad, but there was characterizations or parts of the character that you drew from his influence. So can we talk about that? And can I also ask you, how did that come about? Did you have to read for that? Did you audition for that? Because it became Navid's a cultural icon in Scotland. So how did you get that part?
So I was I was writing for Chewing the Fat, and I was friends with Ford and Greg. And in fact, the notion of an Asian shopkeeper had come up during Chewing the Fat because Ford, Greg, and I all live in the same area in the West End of Glasgow, and we all use the same shop, and it was run by an Asian family. And Ford could do a bang-on impersonation of the dad because Ford is just the master of voices, and it'd make us laugh. And then during Chewing the Fat, Ford and Greg had said, "Look, do you think it'd be okay if Ford actually played an Asian shopkeeper?" Now, back then, it would have been fine, and also, now he'd be cancelled, obviously. But back then, I thought, well, yeah, I don't have an issue with it because it's not like he's trying to impersonate a whole race of people. He's impersonating this one guy in particular. And if you need help writing it, then I'll help you write it. If you want to keep the references right, then I'm here. But it didn't happen. Probably a good idea didn't happen because when you see what's happened to Little Britain and Bo Selector being hauled over the coals, rightly or wrongly, for that sort of thing, cultural appropriation, etc. So then, during the Fat finished and the still game thing came around, and then the boys said, "Remember that Asian shopkeeper character?" I said, "Yeah. My offer still stands if you want help writing it." And he said, "No. Do you want to play him?" And Greg had always said that he found it hilarious when I impersonated my dad. So that I did audition for it, but I think they had me in mind anyway. But I think I had to audition for the producer rather than them.
Right.
And also, I wanted to, it made me feel more secure because I wasn't an established actor at all at that point. I was a presenter turned writer turned actor. So I'd done a bit of acting, but I didn't feel like I'd earned my stripes in that kind of Presbyterian way. This is bizarre in Asian that went to Catholic school. There's Presbyterian tendencies, but there you go. So it was good for me to have to read for it. But I think they had me in mind anyway. And I did. It was all written. I mean, Ford and Greg write every single word of Still Game, the geniuses that they are. So what I wanted to bring was just authenticity, and I knew who this guy was. I thought if I just need to play. We had a shop. My mom did run it, not my dad, but there was also that brilliant line of sarcasm, which is already in the text that they've written. That is, you see it, and I know exactly how Navids are formed. It's guys that have worked in really kicked in areas through the 70s, through the bad years, and have put up with a lot of shite from Neds, and their only real defense is sarcasm and humor, and that's what they do. And they have that brilliant hybrid accent, which again is a gift. That Glaswegian accent hadn't really been done on screen before, so I thought, right, I can take that. I can just do my dad, but Ouija him up a bit. Because my dad speaks like this, you see. He's that cheeky bugger. He does not particularly Ouija because he was in his 30s when he came to Glasgow. Whereas if you put a bit of you're totally brand new. I met guys who were more Ouija than my dad. And also I went to Langside College, and there was a lot of guys that spoke like this. There a lot of Asian lads that spoke with the hybrid accent. So I knew I could just squash all that stuff together. And then physically, he's very much like my dad. I mean, it's actually scary how much Navid looks like my dad. If you put a turban on Navid, it's my dad. I remember watching the Big Innes episode, the Story Maduri sketch, and I watched it back. And when I'm doing the bartering thing, selling the Maduri to Jack and Victor, I do this thing where I go like this, and it's my dad. And I didn't know I'd done it until I watched it back. And it was like, it was quite disconcerting that I've just turned into my dad. And there was another thing where the Hyperdales episode, where so Michael, the director, said, so basically, we're just going to film you just walking about Hyperdales. You're just like curious as to what is this place, and just do what you think Navid would do. So I was walking up with my hands behind my back, exactly like my dad does, like Prince Philip inspecting the troops, and I just flicked a box like that. It's what my dad does. It just came from this atavistic urge to flick a box, and I did it. Thought, I've just turned into my dad. So the massive elements of dad in Navid, and it happens. It so happens that my dad is sarcastic, and it so happens.
It's such a Glaswegian thing as well. That kind of sarcasm.
Oh God, yeah. Oh, it's like bone dry, like weaponized sarcasm. It's that thing as well of getting your equalizer in first and getting your insult in first and cutting people down. It's such a Scottish thing, and it's healthy to a point. And beyond that, really unhealthy. But it's what keeps us all grounded. It's why I like it. It's that whole thing of don't get ideas above your station is good to a point because it stops people being wankers to it. But then there's a point where you think, oh, come on, let people express themselves. Don't always. Who's it said? They said that if you want to know the difference between England and Scotland, they said that they wore a beret in London. There's a bit of an affectation, and it was fine. No one said anything. And they did the same in Glasgow. And within 3 seconds, someone shouted from a moving car, "Ooh la la!" It's like someone's going to have an opinion. Do you know what I mean? It's so true about Glasgow. So yeah, that's that. All those elements are present in Navid. And what's been really gratifying is that people have said, "Oh, did the boys base Navid on our shopkeeper?" About 100 people have said to me, "Oh, we've got a Navid in our shop." That's a testament to the authenticity of the writing and hopefully what I bring physically and audibly to the character.
Yeah, let me talk about your performance, because did you feel you went on to be in a soap opera called River City? And if the internet's to be believed, you did 69 episodes of that.
Very possibly, yeah.
Did you get better? I'm not saying you started off terrible. I'm just saying, did you find from a skill level you got better the longer you stayed in the soap opera? Were you managing your craft at that point?
I didn't have a craft. That was the point, because I'd arrived organically. When I think about it now, I mean, I was in the biggest sitcom, biggest TV show that's come out of Scotland, playing quite a prominent, well-loved character with zero training. So I was lucky in that I could play a character that I knew really well and felt instinctive to me. But I wasn't a trained actor at all. I'd done comedy acting, which is still acting. I shouldn't do it down, but never trained. And I always felt like an Aravis, like a Johnny-come-lately. We'd be sitting in the canteen in Dumbarton doing River City with the brilliant cast, and they'd be chatting about tours they'd done and venues they'd played. And I'm like, when I think about it, actually, because I hadn't done any stage work whatsoever. My first proper live show was Still Game at the Hydro. So I bypassed Cumbernauld, and I bypassed the Dunfermline and Halborough, gone straight to 11,000 people. So River City is a brilliant, brilliant academy. I was learning stuff all the time, watching other amazing actors. And also just the bare bones of television acting, things of hitting your mark and learning lines, all that stuff, which I never really learned properly, but you can't not learn when you're doing that volume of work. Like if you're working 5 days a week, doing 20 different scenes in a week and working with different directors, it's impossible not to learn. So I definitely probably did it back to front, arse about it. I should have done River City first, but, it's made me feel a bit more secure as an actor having done a soap, because I think soap acting is really underrated and it's a definite skill and not everyone can do it. There's a couple in Coronation Street that really can't do it. They've been in it for years. I won't name any names. But sometimes you're having to, the nature of continuing drama is you're having to sell really bizarre storylines or bizarre concepts, but you have to make it feel really real. You're not in a Marvel film, you're in a soap. You've got to make it feel grounded and real. And I think that's a skill which hopefully I did learn.
I think I've watched you also in Stonehouse, and I watched you in Chemistry of Death. And I think without sounding, I'm just trying to kiss up to you, it made me think I could imagine you in some kind of tartan noir thing as an Asian detective.
I'd love to.
Kind of
I'd love to do
novel, a kind of Chris Brookmyre type novel. I'd love to see you do something like that.
Well, I'm a big fan of Chris Brookmyre. I think he's very funny and a brilliant, storyteller. Do you know what? I mean, because I'm a softest shite, I would love to play a hard man anyway, or just watching Rebus and the reboot. I think Richard Rankin, who's a friend, but I've always thought was brilliant. And watching him, I don't know. I mean, I've never really been the lead in anything apart from Fags, Mags and Bags, which is Radio 4 comedy that I do, but I've never been the lead in anything. And it's quite a responsibility to do some of the heavy lifting that way. I'd love to give it a go, but I've never done it. I jokingly, I was at the BAFTAs, Scottish BAFTAs a couple of years ago, and Peter Capaldi was there and Ncuti Gatwa was there. And it had been announced that Ncuti was going to be the next Doctor Who at that point. So I got a picture with the two of them. And I just jokingly said, here are the last 3 Scottish Doctor Who's. Well, the last 2 and the next one. I thought, put it out in the universe. And then people say, oh, you'd be a great Doctor Who. I've actually got a jacket that I would wear as Doctor Who.
I think you'd be a great Doctor Who.
I
don't see why not. I could see that working. When I was chatting to Michelle Gomez, who played Missy, she played the first female master.
Michelle Gomez, by the way, is in awe of her. She's just genius. She's brilliant. Fantastic actor.
we did a Zoom interview from her New York apartment, and she's got phenomenal energy.
Oh God, yeah.
It's like, interviewing her, I thought I would like her, and I did, but it was kind of like hanging on to a runaway train half the time. And she was talking about they had offered her a part in Doctor Who, and she couldn't do it. I think she was doing the flight attendant. No, that was much later, wasn't it? She was doing something else, and she wrote to Stephen Moffat and said, I can't do this, but I'm a big fan, and if you ever have the opportunity, I'd love to. And didn't hear anything back. And then months later, they phoned up the agent and offered her the part of Missy. And she said it is the gift that keeps on giving, because she got the flight attendant from doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I think it was the director or the casting director saw her in Doctor Who. But she's
I mean, she deserves to be global. She's got an absolutely unique energy. Just wonderful. I was a big fan of her in Green Wing. They obviously just let her do what the hell she liked in Green Wing, and it was brilliant. I had a chance to work with her, although she probably doesn't know that I worked with her, but it was a Radio 2 comedy set in the British Raj, and I recorded it actually where I'm sitting now. It was during COVID, so I had the stepladder and the quilt and the headphones.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
And she was in a New York apartment playing this rather cleaner lady in Delhi. And I was playing this Indian serf in the office, but we didn't have scenes together. But it was weird hearing her voice in her apartment. And then she was, and I wish I had a chance to actually interact with her, but I never did. I did meet her at the BAFTAs once, and she was there with her mum. And I think her mum was a Still Game fan, so that was nice. I'd like to think that Michelle Gomez was a Still Game fan. But
very down to earth lady.
Yeah, brilliant.
Really nice. I'd kind of hoped that she would invite me to summer with her and Jack. But wasn't happening.
Yeah, that was the other thing was that I think because she was recording in her apartment, she was telling someone to keep the dog out of the room, and that someone was obviously Jack Davenport, which is quite surreal.
He obviously wasn't around because the dog was going mental when we were we were doing the podcast. Final question. I just talking about playing a doctor. You are playing a doctor, and am I right in thinking in the new series of The Rig, Martin Compston?
Yes, correct. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun because, in a lot of ways, the biggest job I've done, not in terms of number of scenes, I'm in, I think, 3 scenes. And that's what I tend to get small parts in big productions, which is fine. And it's a nice part because I'm working with 250 supporting artists. So, you get it wrong, you have to reset 250 people. So there's pressure there. And I managed not to get it wrong. But it was, it's and again, it's a Martin Compston, someone that I love. And He came and did Still Game, but he did no scenes with me, and I didn't have any scenes with him in The Rig either. I keep doing jobs with Shirley Henderson, but not meeting Shirley Henderson apart from the read through. And I've said to my mum, look, if you're still disappointed I didn't become a doctor, here I am. You could, if you want, I can get someone to grade it to look more like a documentary. You can send it back to the family and tell them Sanj finally did his degree. But I tend to get actually figures of authority because I've got quite a low voice, and I can, I played a couple of doctors, a lawyer, a headmaster. I tend to be quite genial people, but which is why I would love to play someone that was. In fact, I was in. I don't know if you saw Dinosaur, Ashley Stories.
I know what you're talking about. I've not seen it, but I know exactly what you mean by that. Yeah.
So I play a total arsehole in that, and that was a lot of fun. Because I'd like to think I'm not a total arsehole, maybe 70%. But he's this art critic guy who's incredibly sniffy, and it was a lot of fun to play that. So I guess it's just sometimes, like, I found it when I was playing AJ in River City, they'd written it for me. It was tailor written for me, and they wrote it as a version of me, and that could be quite hard sometimes. Sometimes it's easier to have a bit of distance between who you are and who you're playing.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand you can end up disappearing a wee bit when it is.
Yeah.
But Sanjeev, thank you very much for chatting to us today. You've been a delight. Thanks for joining us on the ScotsCare podcast. Thank you very much.
No, nice to meet you. Thank you very much.
The Saltire Donor Club is our monthly giving club. Could you spare a monthly donation of any amount to help homeless and vulnerable Scots? Visit our website to give monthly and join the Saltire Donor Club. It couldn't be easier, and it will make a difference to those struggling in London.